I'm not gonna lie to you. So this week we're in Alma 43 to 52, and out of those 9 verses, I have 3. I've read chapter 43, 44, and 45. But it's fine, okay? Because there's a lot of really, really great stuff in these chapters, and we're gonna talk about that today. And then all the other chapters you can just go and read yourself, and you can find wonderful insights on your own because I trust you. So, yeah. Okay, let's hop into chapter 43. I'm going to give you like some setup basically here. Give you some context on what's happening. So basically, Alma just got done speaking to all of his sons, right? Well, now we're done kind of talking about him. He just goes and teaches and stuff. And we're going to read about some fighting and stuff, which is what we're going to be talking about a lot over the next couple of weeks. Because I think it's Alma chapter 45 until like the end, basically, that are called the war chapters. I can't tell exactly what chapters they are, but I think it starts at 40, maybe it's 46. So anyway, we're going to be talking a lot about fighting. And it can be boring sometimes. You're like, oh my gosh, they're just fighting and killing each other again. Like, I've already read this. Come on, Ruth. Well, here's the thing. There was a very limited amount of space that Moroni had to work with. Or not Moroni. Mormon. Yeah, Mormon. Had to work with when compiling the gold plates. He had all of these records of all these prophets, and so he had to choose what is going to go on these gold plates. And he specifically chose for a reason to include all of these stories of these battles. Why? What did he want to teach us from them? What do we have to learn from these chapters? Because if you think back on when we had to read 2nd Nephi, and a lot of it was like Isaiah, it can be hard to understand, and it can be boring sometimes. You're like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Right? Kind of the same thing with this. You're like, okay, they're killing each other. They go to this land to kind of like, it's a strategic thing to like go and hide here and hide under these rocks and all these things. And it's like, what's the point of this? Well, there's a point to everything that we read in the scriptures, both the Book of Mormon and the Bible. And so if you take the time to purposely look and find out what you need to learn, you're going to find it. If you go in reading knowing that you need to learn something from this and that you're going to get something from this, you're going to get something. So with that said, let's go ahead and hop into these chapters. So we're going to hop into chapter 43, and we're going to read verse 9. And let me read this to you. It says, and now the design of the Nephites was to support their lands. Or actually, hang on, let me back up and read 8 to give you some more context. It says, for behold, his designs, a.k.a. Zarahemnah, he's the guy that's like basically causing this fight. So for behold, Zarahemnah's designs were to stir up the Lamanites to anger against the Nephites. This he did that he might usurp great power over them, and also that he might gain power over the Nephites by bringing them into bondage. Then in verse 9 it says, and now the design of the Nephites was to support their lands and their houses and their wives and their children, that they might preserve them from the hands of their enemies, and also that they might preserve their rights and their privileges, yea, and also their liberty, that they might worship God according to their desires. So we have the Nephites, and like Zarahemnah, or it's also, so basically the Amalekites, the Zoramites, and the Nephites all team up to fight the Nephites, just to give you some context. And their whole, like, their reasoning behind why they're fighting is to gain power, to put the Nephites in bondage. Those are the 2 reasons. The Nephites, however, only fight basically in retaliation. Not retaliation, that's not the right word, but they only fight to protect from that attempt of fighting from the Lamanites. They fight to be able to keep their freedom, so not in bondage. They fight so that the Lamanites don't have power over them. And they fight to be able to protect what they love and cherish, such as their families and their homes. And so as I was thinking about this, as I was kind of reading, I was thinking about the anti-Lehi Nephites who had made that covenant not to fight, and they had buried their swords or whatever. And I was kind of thinking about this in like modern day terms, and I was like, I feel like I would be the type of person that would probably make a covenant not to fight, because I am not a confrontational person, let alone a fighter. Like, I do not like violence of any for. Like, I can't stand it. And so I would not be someone that would want to go into a war. And so I was like, you know what? I'd be one of those faithful people that's like, I'll bury my weapons. I don't want to fight. But then I read this, and I was like, you know what? Maybe I would fight. If God called me to go and fight in a war to protect my home and my family and my freedom and my right to be able to worship my God, especially that last one, I would go and fight if God called me to do it. And so it's just kind of this, it's really interesting just to see that, you know, not all of the Nephites here had made that covenant. It was just the anti-Lehi Nephites that later are also called the Ammonites. And so it's just really cool here to see that, like, you know, some people are going to make choices according to what they need to do in their life. And putting this into modern day terms, maybe some people choose not to go on a mission and others do. And I feel like a lot of times, sometimes people get judgment for that and other times they don't. But I think what it comes down to is we all have a mission here on earth, and God has a plan for each and every one of us, and our plans are going to look different. So whether your mission is to bury your weapons of war and not fight, or whether it is to fight, to protect what you love and cherish, that's up for you to decide. That's up for you to pray about. And so that's the lesson I want to teach you in verse 9. Now, we're going to go into verse 17, because basically we meet Moroni, and this is what it says. It says, "And Moroni took all the command and the government of their wars. And he was only 25 years old when he was appointed chief captain over the armies of the Nephites." I love this, and I will tell you why. I've always felt different. I've been homeschooled my whole life. I've been a member of the church when a lot of my friends haven't been. And even inside the church, sometimes I do things differently than other people. Like, sometimes I notice that I put in more effort into my spiritual welfare than other people my age. And it's been hard at times. And also just kind of outside of terms, like outside of the church, just the way that I act in normal circumstances. Like the fact that I had a job at an earlier age than most people. Just like all of those things, I've always felt very different, and like I didn't fit in to what you would normally think of, like, for my age. And so when it says this, and it says, "And he was only 25 years old. They trusted a 25-year-old to be the chief captain over all of the Nephite army." They trusted this 25-year-old named Moroni to basically come up with the strategies to defeat the Lamanites. He had a huge responsibility. But you know what? I bet God prepared him for it. God knew that that's what was needed. And so I really love this, because in my life and even in your life, sometimes that's just how it goes. Sometimes we're going to have, maybe we will or maybe we won't. It can be either side of the coin. But I don't think our age should determine what we can or cannot do. Because sometimes God will call us to do stuff, even if we don't feel worthy or we don't feel like the right age or the right this or that. And so it's just a really powerful lesson, because I know for me, I've never fit in to my age bracket. I've always felt very different, and I felt like I'm 18 when I was 12, you know? And so just this, that says he was only 20 and 5. Only. But I don't know. I just think it's really powerful that you can do whatever God needs you to do. It doesn't matter how old you are. So that's the lesson that I want to kind of point out there. Then we go to verse 21. And now it kind of gets a little bit more into detail of like the war. Like they're in the middle of this fighting. And it says that these Lamanites come and they're not wearing anything except for like, what is it called? And they were naked save it were a skin which was girded about their loins. Okay, so they have no protection. Whereas the Nephites, they have, let's see, what does it say? They were armed with breastplates and shields and like just all of this stuff, right? They had all of this armor. And it says in verse 21, "But they were not armed with breastplates nor shields, therefore they were exceedingly afraid of the armies of the Nephites because of their armor, notwithstanding their number being so much greater than the Nephites." Now, the lesson I want to take away here, which might not be something that you expect, but we're going to apply this to modern terms, okay? In our day, most armies have protection, okay? It doesn't matter what army you're fighting, they're going to have some form of protection, right? So that doesn't apply to this day in this sense. But you know what it does apply to? Spiritual battles. Or, I guess, our spiritual preparedness? Is that grammatically correct? Whatever. Doesn't matter. And so I was thinking about this and I was like, you know what? When it comes to spiritual things, there are those who are prepared and there are those who aren't prepared. And it tends to be that those who aren't prepared are jealous or afraid of those that are prepared. And this is in worldly senses. This can be in spiritual things. This goes for physical. Like, no matter what, in any context, those who are unprepared are scared or jealous of or whatever of those who are prepared. And so in this spiritual sense, would you rather be the one that's prepared or unprepared? If God were to come tomorrow, would you want to be one of the people that was prepared for his coming or unprepared? Why? Now, what can you do to make sure that you are the prepared? Because I feel like, I know in my life, sometimes I'm like, no, it's fine. Like, I don't really need this. Like, I can still be ready, or I can still, like, I don't need this to be ready or whatever, right? I'm like, oh, it's okay if I read my scriptures for like 10 minutes instead of 30 today. Like, it's not that big of a deal because it's not going to make that big of an effect. But what happens is that when we do that once, then we could do it twice, and then it happens over and over and over again until, 5 years have passed by and we still have the same habits. We're still, like, we're never really praying, and we never really read scriptures. Maybe we read it, like, once a week and we do it really great, but then, like, we never do it any other day of the week. And years and years and years pass, and you're still not prepared because you keep putting it off. And in fact, I actually I helped teach the lesson in Sunday or Young Women's yesterday. And there was this one video in the lesson prep that I watched. And it was about this guy who wanted to make this big investment or whatever. And this was put into context of like old times. I guess this wasn't modern. But there's this guy who had borrowed a lot of money to like get something. And of course he had to pay it back. He had like a payment plan or whatever. And he would make his installments or whatever, but he wasn't really quite doing as much as he needed to or whatever. He was like, it's fine, like I can do more later, I can make more investments, yada yada. Like the day that will come when I'm like, the day's not gonna come where it's gonna like bug me or whatever. Like, I guess he kept putting it off or whatever, right? Well, the day finally came when like the person that he had borrowed the money from came and he was like, okay, I need the money. And he was like, well, I don't have it. And he was like, well, then you're going to jail. That was the agreement that we made. You signed a contract. And so he takes the guy to jail or whatever because he can't do anything. It was part of his contract. And the whole point of this video is because in last week's lesson, we talked about like justice and mercy. And so the whole point here is that, yes, the guy that was the guy that gave the money, basically. So you have the guy that gave the money, you have the guy that borrowed the money. And the guy that gave the money, he needed justice for what was owed. But at the same time, the guy that borrowed the money wanted mercy. And in case you don't know, mercy basically is defined as forgiveness or something that's not like owed. Like it's something you don't deserve. Okay? And so he was asking for mercy, and the other guy was like, well, I need justice. And both laws couldn't be satisfied until this third guy came in and he was like, well, let me pay what he owes and then he can pay me back at a later time, And so when he did that, the guy who owed the money was set free. The justice was satisfied because the original guy got his money, and the mercy was satisfied because the guy was given, like he was helped or whatever when he didn't deserve it. And so both laws were satisfied. And this whole video is basically representation of, Jesus, right? We have God has to have justice for the sins. And we want mercy. And so Jesus comes in and says, well, you know what? Let me pay the debts for you. And both laws will be satisfied. And so, I can't remember what I was talking about before this. I have no clue why I started talking about this. I think I was talking about being prepared. I don't know. Or I seriously don't remember. That really bugs me. Okay, but something about being prepared and not prepared. Just be prepared. I seriously don't remember what we were talking about. Okay, moving on. Let's go to... Actually, okay, let's go to 37, because now we see what happens to the Lamanites when they weren't prepared. Says, and the work of death commenced on both sides, but it was more dreadful on the part of the Lamanites, for their nakedness was exposed to the heavy blows of the Nephites, with their swords and their scimitars, which brought death almost at every stroke. So because they weren't prepared, they were dropping like flies. Now the Nephites were still being killed too, but it was way worse for the Lamanites. Why? Because they were unprepared. And in the sense of, like, and going back to that whole spiritual thing, in the context of spirituality, when we're unprepared and when we don't make an effort to be prepared, that's what leads to spiritual death. And as President Nelson has said, in the upcoming times, we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared. We need to have the Holy Ghost in order to survive spiritually. Otherwise, it's not going to turn out great for us. Then we're going to go, to chapter 44. And what happens is the Nephites start to, like, overpower the Lamanites. And it comes to the point where, Zarahemnah and those guys are like, okay, stop, like, we don't want you to hurt us, whatever. And so they kind of, like, are bowing down or whatever, right? And Moroni, like, you know what, we won't kill you, but here's our conditions. And so he tells them, he wants them to make a covenant to basically take their weapons and leave and, like, not come back and leave them in peace or whatever, right? And let's see, Zarahemnah is like, no, because we can't make an oath that we know we're gonna break. Which is very interesting. I can't speak. It's very interesting that he says that. But that's not what I want to focus on. So, after Zarahemnah kind of responds, Moroni returns the sword and the weapons of war, which he had received unto Zarahemnah, saying, behold, we will end the conflict. And in 11, it says, now I cannot recall the words which I have spoken. Therefore, as the Lord liveth, ye shall not depart, except ye depart with an oath that ye will return, or that ye will not return again against us to war. Now, as ye are in our hands, we will spill your blood upon the ground, or ye shall submit to the conditions which I have proposed. So he says, okay, you say you didn't want to agree to our conditions, we're going to kill you, unless you agree. And then in verse 12, here's what I want you to focus on. It says, and now when Moroni had said these things, or these words, Zarahemnah retained his sword, and he was angry with Moroni. And he rushed forward that he might slay Moroni. But as he raised his sword, behold, one of Moroni's soldiers smote it, even to the earth, and it broke by the hilt. And he also smote Zarahemnah that he took off his scalp, and it fell to the earth. And Zarahemnah withdrew from before them into the midst of his soldiers. And so I point this out to you because as I was reading this the other day, I was just, I was reading along, and I was expecting, okay, so Zarahemnah comes at Moroni to kill him. I was expecting, Moroni to fight back and win, because he has the strength of God. When I tell you that I was so shocked that soldier came forward and, like, attacked him and took off his scalp, like, I was not expecting it. Like, it was a plot twist. I was like, wait, what? I was not expecting that. Because, in past times, it's like if somebody comes to attack the prophet of God or whatever, I guess he isn't a prophet, but you know what I mean, the man of God, he's always just fights back and usually defeats the other guy because, he had the strength of God. But I feel like I don't remember a whole lot of instances where somebody else has stepped forward and protected that person, really. It's always been like they just defended themselves. And so as I was reading this, it said that one of the soldiers came forward and he took off his scalp, and I was like, what? Like, I was so shocked. And so I want to point this out because there's something that we can learn from this. This is a great example of teamwork and how, like, if you think about it, if the roles were reversed and Moroni was coming at Zarahemnah, would one of the Lamanite soldiers jump forward to save him? No. So why does it happen with the Nephites? Because they are men of God. They're the people of God. They have him on his side. And they are a team. They work together. And it actually kind of goes back to what we read in the last chapter about how they're here to protect their lands and their homes and their families. They're not here with like a wicked, what's the word I'm looking for? They don't have like a wicked end goal in mind. They're just here to protect what the Lamanites are trying to take. And so because of that, because they're not really trying to get anything, they're just kind of protect, it kind of means, like, I don't know, I guess it means that they're a lot more united, I guess. They've just kind of been forced into this war simply because of the Lamanites' choices. And they just work together. And it's just really, really cool to just see that when... Okay, I guess let me... I can't speak. Let me rephrase this. In modern terms, in our lives, when we, too, are surrounded by spiritual people like Moroni was, they should have our back. They should be able to protect us. And vice versa. We should be willing to protect other people because we are sons and daughters of Christ, and that is what Christ would do. We are disciples of Christ. And so this is also a great lesson in just how we pick the people we're around. Do you have a close circle of family and friends who would be willing to step forward and protect you? Or are you like the Lamanites and you're surrounded by other people who are there for selfish reasons? And so I just wanted to point that out to you. Now, let's see, where do I want to go? We're going to jump into chapter 45. And... Oh, okay. So it's 45 through 62 that are considered the war chapters because it says that these chapters are the account of the people of Nephi and their wars and dissensions in the days of Helaman, according to the record of Helaman, which he kept in his days. And to give you context, Helaman is Alma's son. So, we're going to read verse 7. Basically, Alma comes to Helaman. This is after the war, right? Everything ends up peacefully, whatever. Everything turns out great. And the Lamanites made that covenant to not fight them anymore, and they go home, and everyone is happy. Well, then we get into this next chapter, and Alma comes to Helaman, and he's like, okay, do you believe everything I said to you a little bit ago? Like, that we read, like, last week, or, no, the week before. And he said, yeah, I believe you. And he asks, do you believe Jesus Christ who will come? He says, yeah, I believe you. And then he says, will you keep my commandments? And he said, yea. I believe, I was reading the wrong thing. And he said, yea, I will keep thy commandments with all my heart. And when I read this, I actually read this morning, I was like, whoa. The past two times, like, okay, so with verse 3, he says, yea, I will believe. And then verse 5, he says, yea, I believe all the words which thou hast spoken. And this one, he's like, yea, I will keep thy commandments with all my heart. And so the past couple ones, he was like, yeah, I believe. And this time he's like, yeah, I believe. And I will keep the commandments with all of my heart. And so I wrote in my margins, I was like, what does it mean to me to keep the commandments with all of my heart? And I think everybody will answer this differently. And I actually want to invite you to think about this for a second. But I want to share what I think that means. For me, keeping the commandments with all of my heart, like, if you think about it, you can keep it with all of your heart or keep it with half, right? And so, if you think about it in this way, you can keep it with all of your heart, and what would that look like? And what does it look like to keep it with half of your heart? For me, I feel like keeping it with half of my heart is, I'm just trying to do it. I don't always, I fail sometimes, sometimes I lie, sometimes I might steal, sometimes I might dishonor my parents, those sort of things. Sometimes I might not love people. But keeping it with all of my heart, I think that's just like a deeper. Like, I think that just means like, I will keep it. There's no question about it. I will honor my parents. I will love people in the best way that I know how. I'm not going to be perfect, but I will keep them. And actually, I want to kind of explain this other concept that goes along with this. When I was at FSY, our session advisors, it was this older couple, they were probably like in their 40s or 50s. And they were telling us about their story and about how they had both been married and they both got divorced. One, like the wife, her husband had cheated, and this guy, he said that his wife had said that he didn't love him anymore. It was this whole thing. And so they both had like these dramatic divorces. And then because they were both going through divorce at the same time, they found each other. And they were able to connect because of their similar situations. And it led to their marriages. Or to their marriage. And the reason they told us this is they said, you know, God gives us the ideal. You get married, you have kids, and you make it back to heaven, right? You follow the covenant path. But he knows that we won't always be able to follow the ideal. He knows it's just not possible. We're human. We make mistakes. But it's the intent of our heart that matters. It would be different if you got married and then you were like, oh, well, this is boring. I'm going to leave, you know. For them, it was like they got divorced because of their spouse's actions. They had no choice over the matter. I mean, maybe they did, but not really. I mean, the guy cheated on the wife or whatever. So, her name is Sister Casper. And so the guy had cheated on Sister Casper. And, of course, she wasn't going to stay with him, right? And so, it was just, I don't know. Going back to what it says about keeping the commandments with your whole heart, that's the ideal. Keeping the commandments perfectly and following them exactly. But that's not always possible. And so I think, for me, I feel like what he means by my whole heart is, I know I'm not going to be perfect, but I'm going to try every single ounce I can. I will give my whole heart and soul to following these commandments with the knowledge that I might not always be able to keep them. And so in our lives, how can we keep the commandments with our whole hearts? Knowing that we won't always be perfect, but that we can repent and continually strive to be better. Now, follow-up question. How are you going to be better at keeping the commandments with your whole heart today? Not tomorrow, not for the whole year, but today. Because if you can just focus on today, find one little action that will make you better today, and then tomorrow you can wake up and say, how do I want to get better today? Just one small step. That is how you make progress. I know for me, I'm always like, I want to be better at this, and I'm going to do all these grand things and yada yada. But that's not how it works. That's not how goals and progress work. How it works is that you have to make one small choice. Take one small step every single day to get you where you want to go. And I quoted this last week, actually, but I've been reading the book, The Heart of the Matter by President Nelson. Love it. Highly recommend it. But in the first chapter, he says, don't take a step in a direction you don't want to go. So today, how will you take a step in the direction that you do want to go? How will you follow the commandments one step or 1% better? And that is the lesson of that verse. Then I want to just quickly leave one little thing before I have to go. Let's see, where is it? Okay, in verse 18, when he's done talking to Helaman, he says, and when Alma had done this, he departed out of the land of Zarahemla, as if to go into the land of Melech. And it came to pass that he was never heard of more. As to his death or burial, we know not of. Behold, this we know, that he was a righteous man. And the saying went abroad in the church that he was taken up by the Spirit, or buried by the hand of the Lord, even as Moses. But behold, the scripture saith the Lord took Moses unto himself, and we suppose that he also received Alma in his spirit unto himself. Therefore, for this cause, we know nothing concerning his death and burial. And when I read this, I was like, wait, what? He just left and nobody ever saw him again? He just hugged his family goodbye and said, oh, I'll see you later, and then never came back? Or did he tell his family that he was leaving and never coming back? Either way, it's just weird. And I guess this really just shocked me because I've never heard of a story like this. I've heard about, who was it? There were three apostles, I don't remember which ones, but there were three apostles who, I don't remember what it's called, but they never died, basically. God gave them immortality in this life, and they're still roaming around the earth today. I don't remember. I've heard that, and I've heard a lot of crazy things about how prophets and apostles like haven't died or something. But this one I was like, whoa, I've never heard that before. So I just wanted to point that out in case you aren't able to actually read the scriptures this week. It might be nice for you to know that, because it's just a cool little, oh, God does work in mysterious ways. And I also love that they wrote, because I'm pretty sure this is Helaman writing now. Don't quote me. But I'm pretty sure this is Helaman, because it says that this is in the days of Helaman, according to the record of Helaman. And so if Helaman did write this, he said, we don't know where he went. We don't know if he died. But what we do know is that he's a righteous man. And we know that God did what he needed to do. And so it's a cool story, but also it just shows some really great faith. And it just shows that sometimes we don't have to know everything. But we can focus on what we do know. We can focus on the fact that Alma was a righteous man, and that's all that matters. And so with that, I'm going to leave you off. I encourage you to read the other chapters of this week. I am going to be reading them this week. Just read them when you can. If you get 2 weeks behind and it's like 2 weeks from now and you're still reading this week's stuff, it's not that big of a deal. Nobody's going to come. There's no police that are going to just come and be like, you should have run that 2 weeks ago. No. Just read it when you can. And maybe even listen to it in the car or when you're washing dishes. Just find time where you can. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye.